Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Parkinson's Foundation Wellness Wednesdays webinar. Thank you for joining us today. We will begin soon. Please know we are recording today's presentation, and you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to today's recording and additional resources in about 1 week. Thanks for being here. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Parkinson's Foundation's PD Health at Home Wellness Wednesdays. I am grateful you are here. Today's PD Health at Home Wellness Wednesday webinar is focusing on understanding driving and Parkinson's, and our expert has many years of knowledge to invite us into exploring this idea of safety and living with Parkinson's disease while driving. Before we get into it, I want to remind you about our PD Health at Home virtual programs. Each week we offer sessions tailored to support people with Parkinson's and their care partners, including Mindfulness Mondays, Wellness Wednesdays, Fitness Fridays, expert briefings, and our Spanish language series, EP Salud en Casa. Be sure to visit our website by scanning the QR code to see what's coming up next and explore our archived videos on YouTube. PD Health at Home is presented by the Light of Day Foundation, whose generosity has made this programming possible. Thank you, Light of Day. It's my pleasure to introduce our facilitator for today's session. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Margaret O'Connor. Dr. Margaret O'Connor is a leader in both academic and medicine and community brain health initiatives. She was the past president-elect of the International Neuropsychological Society and leads the neuropsychology team at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, where she's also mentored over 80 students. She partnered with Dr. Alvaro Pascal-Leon to create the Brain Fit Club, a program designed to boost memory, attention, and cognitive wellness. She was also a past co-chair for the Alzheimer's Association's Medical and Scientific Advisory Committee for Massachusetts and serves on their board. As Director of Research for DriveWise, Dr. O'Connor has helped shape evidence-based driving assessments and public education on safe driving. She's an associate professor at Harvard Medical School and a dedicated researcher exploring memory, aging, and how we retain personal and public events over time. Dr. O'Connor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay.
There you are.
Can you see me? Okay, excellent.
I can, yeah.
Thank you, Krista, and thanks to the Parkinson's Foundation for asking me to speak about this very important topic. As you can see, memory has been near to my heart. It's been an area of research for me for many years. And driving fitness, driving competence is one aspect of memory that I have also delved into, partly because it's so important. There were years when we would meet in our clinical setting and talk about patients who were in the early stages of cognitive changes. And we would ask the question, is this person able to drive? And we finally decided that we really couldn't make that determination without a really cohesive driving assessment program, which included a road test. And so I'm going to tell you about that today. But I'm just going to start by saying that I do not have any disclosures. And what I want you to join me in as we talk for the next 40 minutes or so is a discussion about how Parkinson's symptoms affect driving. I want you to learn strategies for self-assessment and available resources. I want you to explore ways to navigate the family conversation about driving, which is often very difficult, and to discover options for transitioning away from driving while maintaining independence. I'm going to start with a big question. Is driving a right or a privilege? I'm going to hit the pause button and let you just contemplate that one for a minute. You know, I would guess that most of you would say it's a privilege, but there are some people who would say it's absolutely a right. What I do want you to know is that driving for many people is very central to their sense of self-esteem. It's critical for independence. It's critical for safety. It provides a sense of freedom. And what we do know that in most states, there's a very well-defined assessment that occurs when someone is beginning to drive, but there's no strong protocol and no consistency in making decisions about when is the right time to stop driving. And this is particularly important because of the importance of driving to many of us. It's important to balance one's independence, one's autonomy with safety for oneself and for the general public. So what do we know about driving? We know that it's a complex activity that is dependent on all sorts of different cognitive and perceptual abilities, including processing speed, ability to scan the environment, sustained attention, mental flexibility, your ability to put on the brake while paying attention to the person next to you, your social awareness, your ability to survey the landscape of other people who are driving towards you and make a determination whether they're driving safely or unsafely. It's also dependent on motor control, visual acuity, and contrast sensitivity. The latter term refers to your ability to discriminate the ground from a particular object from its background. So it can be very compromised in dementia, and it can really be compromised in environmental conditions such as fog. When you are making decisions about driving, you should contemplate the following. Older adults who relinquish their licenses have fewer trips and activities. They may have more health problems, including a higher incidence of depression. And it may be harder for them to get to the doctors or to get out and about, which might help mitigate the depression. So it's not a decision that should be made lightly. Rides are often available. We have in Massachusetts, we have The Ride, which you can sign up for, but it's not really available for discretionary travel. You can't spontaneously sort of go out and call the ride to go out and buy an ice cream cone. And it's often burdensome when someone gives up the right to drive, the privilege to drive. It's often very burdensome on those people around them who have to pick up the slack. So the question has always been, who should start the conversation about when someone should stop driving? And each stakeholder looks to the other when making this decision. Some people would say it's the Department of Motor Vehicles. Others might say it's a healthcare provider who should make that decision. And finally, there may be family members who are involved in the decision. We did a study on this probably 30 years ago, and we did survey different stakeholder groups. About 300 physicians, we surveyed the police, and we surveyed community members. And each group looked to the other to make that decision. Why was this the case? Well, nobody wanted to be the bad guy. And in particular, physicians who were often tasked with that very difficult decision felt that they didn't have the time or the expertise to evaluate driving. What we do know about demographics in the United States is that 74 million Americans will exceed age 65 by the year 2030. This has been called the silver tsunami. And more than 75% of them carry driving licenses. And we know that age in and of itself is associated with more driving errors, with poorer performance on road tests, and with an increase in crash risk and increased mortality. We know that the average man outlives driving by 6 years, and the average woman outlives driving by 10. So this is just a graph that shows you what I just said, which is that there is a relationship between age and driving fitness, driving competence. But I want you to look at both ends of this U-shaped distribution. And let's just look at crashes, which is the blue line. You'll see here that the 16 to 19-year-old driver is at very high risk for crashes. No big surprise. Older people, there's an upward trend for people who are 85 years and older to be involved in crashes, but it's nowhere near the number of crashes that the 16 to 19-year-old is involved in. And this is just a funny cartoon. We did see the headline about the 71-year-old driver in the crash. funny, it didn't mention the age of the SUV driver with the cell phone and the Big Mac. We were curious about the issue of age, and because we had a lot of people who went through our program, we had access to people who are considered the oldest old, people who are 90 years plus, who were still driving. And we did a comparison of 27 people who were age 90 to 97 versus 61 people who were 80 years old. They were the young old. And we compared these two groups and we matched them for level of cognitive functions. So both of these groups were at the same level in terms of their risk for dementia. And what we did find is that drivers who were 90 years old had no greater driving risk than those 10 years younger. What's the takeaway from that? It's that age in and of itself does not predict safety. So the question we're going to consider today, in addition to age, is how does Parkinson's disease affect safe driving? So we know, I told you earlier that I've been very interested in memory for many years. Driving is a special kind of memory. It's called procedural memory. The mechanical skills that are involved in driving support your ability to turn on turn the keys and operate the motor vehicle. Doesn't necessarily mean that you are safe to drive, because you may have attention or other problems or reaction time problems that get in the way. But we know that procedural memory remains strong with age, and even in the context of dementia. It's dependent on different neural circuits in your brain. The other thing we know about Parkinson's is that if you've met one person with Parkinson's, I'm sure you've heard this before, you've met one person. Every person with Parkinson's is unique. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. And so we came to the determination that everybody deserved their day in court, and we developed a program that was personalized in order to ensure a fair and individualized decision. The research on Parkinson's there's not a whole lot. There's a whole lot more research on Alzheimer's disease than Parkinson's. But there's this old study from Germany that showed that they surveyed 12,000 people who had been diagnosed with Parkinson's. And in that group, a high number still had a driver's license, and 60% was still driving. And 15% of that 60% reported a motor vehicle crash. Many people, we know from the work of Crizzle and others, many people with Parkinson's disease self-restrict driving. They may not drive on the highway, they may not drive at night, they make modifications to keep themselves safe. And we do know from the work of Eric Uck and others at the University of Iowa that people with Parkinson's disease may fail road tests at a higher rate compared to those who do not have Parkinson's disease. And this same group did a meta-analysis, which is a fancy term to say that they looked at lots of different studies, and they didn't find that there was an increased crash rate among drivers with PD in everyday life. When you think about driving, you want to think about motor and non-motor Parkinson's symptoms in relation to driving safety. The tremor, it turns out, is not necessarily problematic, but slowness is. Bradykinesia, slow reactions to hazards, may put you at risk for more crashes. And balance may affect your ability to get into and out of the car. What's the intervention? Use of a swivel cushion. And for some people, they have neck rotation limitations, which may make them more prone to make irrational decisions about lane changes. So what do you need? A parabolic mirror and increased scanning. What are the non-motor symptoms? And these, I would say, are much more problematic. So I mentioned to you already contrast sensitivity, your ability to see the figure and discern it from the background. That's a problem that occurs in all different neurodegenerative diseases. Some people have impaired visual awareness, which can be particularly problematic when they're making left-hand turns. Some people with Parkinson's have fluctuations in their level of alertness, in their level of attention, and in their ability, in their level of sleep. And that's very important to monitor in relation to when you do drive. Many people with Parkinson's have executive deficits, which affect multitasking and judgment. The number one important aspect of cognition in terms of driving is multitasking. It's being able to do two things at once. It's being able to hit the brake pedal when you need to do it, and at the same time be aware of all the other things around you simultaneously. Another thing that may undermine safe driving is processing speed. Procedural memory, we've already talked about that. That tends to remain relatively intact in terms of driving, the skills that are requisite for operating a motor vehicle. Some people have apathy and impulsivity, which may make them more risky in terms of driving, or may make them slow to react. So because we were very curious in sort of coming up with a program, a very comprehensive program to address this issue, my colleague, Lissa Capest, and I developed a program called DriveWise, and we developed it many years ago. And sadly, it's no longer in operation because it never made money for the hospital. But during the time that we had this program, which involved office-based testing, which involved a very serious conversation about driving fitness with a social worker, and which involved a road test, we evaluated 1,200 drivers between about 1995 and 2019. And they ranged in age from 18, there were some very young people, to 97. And in our overall sample, about 43% of the people passed our evaluation. Breaking it down a little bit more, the Parkinson's, 62% of the people with Parkinson's disease passed our road test. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what the assessment entailed. So you see the various steps that someone goes through. In my opinion, the most important step was the social work evaluation. That's an evaluation, that's a conversation that the social worker has that focuses on what driving means to a particular person, what other resources they have. Do they have access to Uber or public transportation? Sort of what does it mean? What will life be like in the aftermath of not being able to drive? Will they be totally dependent on family, or can they figure out other ways to get around? After the social worker evaluates sort of the personal needs of that particular person, they're seen by an occupational therapist, both in the lab and then undergo a road test with the occupational therapist and with a certified driving instructor. So always two people in the car, one with the brake pedal, with access to the brake pedal if that need be. And then the team would get together, and that would include social work, occupational therapy, and me, a neuropsychologist. And we would talk about how that person did on the road. And we would write a letter that was very detailed that said, you missed this red light, or you did absolutely wonderfully, so that someone had their day in court. They had feedback. The decision about their driving wasn't being made on the basis of slim data. It was being made on the basis of an actual road test. And then they would have a feedback session with the social worker to see how they adjusted to this new reality, whether it was that they could continue to drive or whether driving cessation had been advised. So the social work evaluation included taking a social history, anticipating the negative consequences of possible driving cessation, administering a little bit of a mental status exam with a test called the MOCA, and then setting up the feedback. And so these are the considerations that the social worker would review in terms of driving safety. Did someone have a history of driving accidents or near accidents? Was the family member concerned? They might do some cognitive screening with the trails test, which I will show you in a minute, and with visual tests, visual constructive tests. And they would rate someone in terms of dementia severity. And this is a slide from Canadian researchers. So they use the Canadian Medical Association, but we would use the AMA. The occupational therapy evaluation was much more extensive. The office evaluation probed vision, cognition, and physical functions. So looking at whether someone's near vision, far vision was adequate, and then doing a test called the trail making test, where people are asked to connect the dots as quickly as they could. Believe it or not, this is a test that is promulgated by the American Medical Association as a screener for driving safety. So this is the sort of thing that they do. They go, they try this. The red lines are way off in this particular slide. I'm not sure why, but and so I'm not even going to bother with this with looking at the red lines in this slide. But the trail making test B is a test of mental flexibility that gives us some information as to whether someone can do two things at once, whether they can dual task, which, as you've already heard me say, is very critical for safe driving. And this is the test that the AMA says should be given to people when you screen them for driving. A person is asked to connect dots going from 1 to A to 2 to B, 3, C, 4, D. So we're looking at speed of processing, and we're also looking at multitasking. Can they hold two streams of information in their head, and can they switch back and forth between them? The rule is that if someone makes 3 errors on this test, or it takes them more than 3 minutes, they should be recommended to have a road test. This does not replace the road test. It's just a screener for whether someone needs a road test. And then, of course, there are common mental status examinations such as the MMSE and the MOCA. We've done a lot of research on the MOCA. But perhaps the most interesting and I think the most relevant test of driving fitness has to do with perceptual speed and multitasking. It's the useful field of view test. And it's a test where someone is shown an object in the middle of the field, and you want to see how quickly they can identify that object. Does it take them 30 milliseconds, or does it take them 1,000 milliseconds to detect whether something is a truck or a car? So this is somehow how it goes. This person is in front of the computer screen, and he's being asked to detect whether something, he will be shown something like this. Hopefully it will pop up on the screen. A car. And then he's asked to say, was that a car or a truck? And he has to make the determination. If it takes him an exceedingly long time to discriminate between whether that was a car or a truck, that's a red flag for driving safety. I've told you divided attention or multitasking is particularly important in driving. So here's useful field of view 2, which is seeing a car and then seeing an object in a different part of the space. And what the person has to do is say, what was in the white box? And then where was that other object? So they have to multitask. They have to do two things at once. This particular subtest is very, very highly associated with driving difficulties. If someone does poorly on useful field of view 2, it's highly likely that they will do poorly during the road test. After undergoing this in-office evaluation, people are often brought on the road, and these various aspects of driving are monitored. Can they start and secure the car? Can they follow instructions and roll signs? Are they visually aware of their environment? When they're driving, do they leave enough space between them and the car in front of them? Are they, very good and in command of lane control? What are their maneuvers like? Are they impulsive? Are they slow? Or are they smooth? How do they respond to an obstacle and in a hazardous situation, something that comes up? You want to look at speed of control. as well as ability to navigate when something is different about the driving landscape. So a certain number of people do not pass the driving exam. And this again is why the role of social work is always important. You know, when the physician tells a person that they can't drive, it may cause a rupture in the doctor-patient relationship. And that's a very important relationship for a lot of people. When a family member tells a person in the family that they can't drive, that may result in acrimony and conflict in the family. So when there is an objective outside consultant, a social worker who has access to the road test information, breaks that news, it can objectify the situation. So what are the steps involved? One is to involve the family, to encourage an open conversation with loved ones. And this is a big blow to a lot of people. So when they hear that news, people need time to process it. They need time to sit with that. It's a major change in their life. They're going to have to figure out a way forward. A highlight for people their resilience. What have they done well in the past? What have they been able to adapt to? Acknowledge their adaptability and strengths, and redefine independence. They can still be in the front seat of their car if they can use Uber. Emphasize mobility alternatives and autonomy beyond driving. And then also address the actual errors that were seen on the road, focusing on specific concerns rather than assumptions. It's important to prioritize safety, frame the conversation around personal and public well-being. You know, some people will say, would you have your grandchild in the car with you? That sort of personalization of driving is sometimes helpful. It's often helpful to assume a medical perspective, explain how health changes, in particular vision, may impact driving ability. That's easier to hear than cognition. And then monitor for anxiety, depression, and frustration, which for some people will follow hearing this type of news. So is there anything good about the future in terms of driving safety? Well, we do know that there have been efforts to redesign roads to protect left turn signals, there are specified left turn lanes. There are reflective pavement markings. There's mixed case lettering on road signs, so it's easier to see, and there's better lighting. One thing that's a whole lot worse, which I'm sure a lot of us are aware of, are the glare of headlights from other cars, which can be very blinding at times for all of us. There are other things about car redesign that have been helpful to promote safe driving. There are improved controls and door handles, an improved instrument panel. There are collision warning systems and automated brake support, and some vehicle-to-vehicle communication systems. And we'll talk in a minute about self-driving car. But these are sorts of things that you want to learn early, that you want to learn while your memory is still fully functional. So you want to make these you want to adapt to the technology that are involved in new cars while your memory will support you to do so that you can make them habits. So what do we know about the future? Well, it's all a little murky, to be honest, but there have been self-driving cars. This is Waymo, that was introduced by Google. And these cars vary in terms of level of driving automation. Some are fully independent and some are only partially independent. Sometimes the driver is more involved than in other cases. We know that there are tons of companies that are developing safe driving cars at this point. But the question is, are these safe? Well, here are the latest in terms of assistance and autonomous driving innovations. So Rivian features a hands-free highway driving in the US and Canada, managing steering, acceleration, and braking, and they use an infrared camera to ensure driver attentiveness. Mercedes-Benz is partnering with a China company and is integrating LiDAR sensors, which are laser focused sensors focusing on three-dimensional objects in space. And it is marketing the first use of the Chinese LiDAR technology in international markets. And that may enhance smart driving capabilities. And Nissan is testing fully autonomous vehicles on the streets of Yokohama in Japan. The driverless van relies on cameras, radars, and LiDAR sensors to navigate. Nissan plans to achieve full autonomy by 2029, 2030. So we also know that autonomous vehicles can get into accidents. So this is just some of the stats on incident reports from different law firms. Between 2019 and 24, there are about 4,000 autonomous vehicles incidents reported, resulting in almost 500 injuries and fatalities. And then the National Highway and Transportation and Safety Administration said that as of December 2024, which is not so long ago, there were 762 reports involving about 600 incidents with Waymo. And Waymo's on the streets in San Francisco and Nashville. There are certain cities where you might see these cars. I've seen them in Los Angeles too. But there are sometimes very sensational events. For instance, just in January, there was a Tesla crash in San Francisco that caused a fatality and 7 injuries, including damage to an unoccupied Waymo vehicle. And then crash rates, other data has shown that there were 9.1 crashes per million drivers in autonomous vehicles versus 4.1 for conventional cars. Waymo's safety record is that over 7 million miles have been driven in Phoenix, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and they report 0.6 injury-related incidents per million drivers, which is lower than human drivers. So there's a little bit of a mixture in terms of the statistics that we're getting. But what we do know is that there may be that autonomous vehicles for some people may be a good refuge if and when they stop driving. So I'm going to end there. I'm going to thank you, and again, thank the Parkinson's Foundation for inviting me. I'm ending a little bit early, but it leaves more time for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor. I really appreciate the way that you outline the context of why we're even talking about this today, right? Why is this a conversation of driving in Parkinson's, and then giving us the real-time objective data of giving inspiration for us to continue considering this and for planning for our future. So I appreciate you framing that up for us.
Thank you.
There's been, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I should also add that, Medicare does not pay for driving evaluations, and I perhaps should have had a slide on the cost of them. They tend to range about $600. One of my colleagues at Harvard Medical School, Kirk Daffner, and I wrote a letter to JAMA Neurology this year, saying that it's time for Medicare to pay for driving evaluations. But, my feeling is good luck with that. We did make the point, but I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, I thank you for putting in the effort, and I know it's a difficult conversation to have personally and in the broader spectrum federally too. So I appreciate you writing something like that and bringing the case to Medicare to consider the importance of driving evaluation. So I was going to follow up with, where can people go for a driver evaluation to receive that objective information about someone's ability to drive?
Yeah, so there are different options, but they're very state dependent. Some states have a lot, no state has a lot of driving programs, but some states have more than others. The driving assessment programs tend to be located in occupational therapy departments of hospitals. So that's one way in. But it's really, I had a slide on, driving assessment programs across the United States. But when I looked at it, it included a lot of programs in Massachusetts that have since closed.
Mm,
So because they don't generate revenue. So I'm not even going to put that slide up because I think it's outdated, even though it's data that's on the internet these days. But
So what I'm
I would probably start with an OT department in a hospital.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. I was just going to outline. So what I'm hearing is reach out to an occupational therapist.
Mhm. Yeah.
Great. Um, would love to address the emotional charge behind having this conversation with family members. So I know that talking about driving cessation can be one of the most emotional conversations for families to have as we move into our aging lives. So, what are some compassionate and effective ways to approach this topic with a loved one?
So I think, and in that slide that I showed, I do think medicalizing the problem. I think people feel guilt and shame as well as the loss of independence when they feel different. But they're they're more able to accept it if it feels like a medical problem.
Mm,
People who have seizures, it's frustrating that they can't drive, but they don't have the same catastrophic reaction as someone who doesn't have seizures who's told not to drive. So I think the extent to which you can point to particular issues having to do with coordination, having to do with vision, what's getting in the way, that is very helpful. But it's also really helpful to figure out the most thoughtful way forward in terms of maintaining independence, whether that means that someone should move to a more urban area, where they have access to a local coffee shop, or whether they need to learn how to use Uber or use something else that allows them so that they don't have to always feel dependent on family members to get around.
mhm. Yeah. I hear learning new skills and being open to adapting to new possibilities that can support myself as someone who might be evaluated as not safe to drive. So being
Mhm,
open to explore ideas and also medicalizing the idea of not being able to drive really takes that
mhm,
personal charge out of it. So appreciate
mhm.
you bringing that to light, Dr. O'Connor.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This segues really well into a question that seems to be bubbling up for most of our viewers today. So, in your experience, what are some signs or indicators that suggest it might be time? It might be time to consider stepping away from driving.
Well, if someone's having fender benders, if they're having those sorts of minor mishaps that seem benign at first, but if they accrue over time, you might consider having someone in your family sort of go out with you for a drive and see whether whether you are driving as well as you always did. Other signs, if someone's beginning to have difficulty with attention, I mean that's the number one for me. If someone is not able to sustain focused attention, or they're not able to do two things at once, those are red flags that would make me very worried about driving. Memory is important, but memory is less important than attention in relation to driving. Um, other signs of driving problems is just if you're out with, one of your relatives and they make impulsive moves when they're driving, they haphazardly go in the wrong lane. Those sorts of things should be
Mhm.
monitored.
Yeah. So I want to follow up. So we have Toby writes, and I don't have family or a caregiver to help me evaluate my own safety of driving. So what I'm hearing, a tool that Toby could consider is, are you having fender benders? Are you noticing that you're switching between lanes haphazardly? And anything else that you could offer for someone who's navigating Parkinson's solo?
So there are, and I should be more up on this, but there are new in-vehicle measuring devices that can be put in where you used to put your lighter, that can measure brake reaction time, that can measure whether you're speeding. There are different insurance companies that will provide some sort of rapid analysis of your driving behaviors, and I don't know the particular ones. I'm sorry that I don't, but that might be some helpful. But I think also talking to your doctor and trying to find out whether there is a driving assessment program in your vicinity.
Yeah. Revisiting the conversation around the role of an occupational therapist in our journey with Parkinson's, Beth is asking, can occupational therapy help with my control of the steering wheel? So she's sharing that they have weakness in their left hand and sometimes it tremors the wheel. So could occupational therapy help support the tremor in that hand?
Hard for me to say, Beth, because I haven't met you and I don't want to dispense advice when I don't really have the expertise to do so. But I think it's worth a question to the occupational therapist and to the neurologist who is overseeing your care.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor. And do you know, just off chance, if our car insurance companies raise premiums for people with Parkinson's?
I don't think they do. But there are some states where there is mandatory reporting. So if someone has a cognitive impairment related to Parkinson's, there are 6 states across the United States, Utah, California, Pennsylvania, where if you see a provider, a mental health provider, a neurologist, anybody, they are mandated to report you to the registry of motor vehicle, and that in turn will trigger a road test.
Just reviewing a question that just came in from someone anonymous, sharing that the manufacturer states that not so many words, but possible side effects can make driving risky while using carbidopa levodopa. In your opinion, are people at a greater risk for driving error if they are taking the gold standard carbidopa levodopa as to opposed if they're not using carbidopa levodopa?
It all depends on how that medicine, and I said earlier that there's a lot of heterogeneity in Parkinson's disease. There's also a lot of heterogeneity in how people react to medicine. And if that medicine affects your level of arousal, or if it affects, attention or any aspect of your cognition, then that would put you at greater risk. But if not, then not. Yeah.
Could you share a little bit describe what heterogeneity means for those of us who might not understand?
So, people as we age, some of us become a little bit forgetful and some of us don't. And there's more dispersion, there's more differences in a particular group of people. In the context of Parkinson's disease, some people have cognitive impairment and some people don't. And they may just have more motor. So that's what I mean. I just mean differences in the manifestations of the disease and in your functional skill set.
Yeah, coming into that, going back to the thing that most of us have heard before, you've met one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's, and how we respond to drugs, how we evolve in the manifestation of Parkinson's disease is really different across the board. So recognizing that there's a lot of diversity in how we,
Right.
us as individuals, respond to the Parkinson's itself. Thank you for clarifying that, Dr. O'Connor.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any more questions come through.
Okay.
So at this time, would love to ask Dr. O'Connor if you have any final remarks before I close this out.
No, I think I've said my piece. And if you do have questions and you want to give people my email, I'm welcome to take other questions if they occur later.
I did get one last question from Mr. John White, if I could ask you, Dr. O'Connor.
Yeah, sure.
So they write in that they've had sorry, it's a pretty long response. 78-year-old male driver with Parkinson's, taught driver's education during the teaching career, also superintendent of schools. Was notified by my state that I had been reported as an unsafe driver due to my Parkinson's disease. The state would not tell me who reported me. They did not evaluate my driving ability and required me to great expense to go through the driving evaluation process.
Mhm.
My driving record was also spotless, which The state acknowledged I completed the evaluation with no driving problems and eventually had my license reinstated. I feel I may have been singled out to a vendetta from a former student. How can I defend myself in these situations, and what recourse do I have in the future?
I don't know if you have recourse, and it sounds like a horrible situation, and I'm really sorry that you went through that. But it's such a state. I mean, there's such differences across different states in terms of who to report, when to report, who can report, and whether or not they mask the identity of the person who reported. So yeah, I don't have good advice for you about how to defend yourself, but I'm really sorry that happened to you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, John. And we got another note. Everyone will receive a copy of today's slides and the recording with additional resources that Dr. O'Connor addressed during the presentation in about a week. And Dr. O'Connor, thank you again for the commitment and devotion that you have in our community of Parkinson's and beyond. I know personally that you've had a great influence on how we understand cognition, memory, and the impact of driving and Parkinson's, and just a wealth, a depth of knowledge that could not express enough gratitude for your dedication to the field. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Krista.
All right, my friends, before you go, an invitation to offer us some feedback. It's essential to shaping the Foundation's programming. As the webinar concludes, a survey will pop up on your screen. Please just take a moment to share your thoughts and let us know what topics you'd like to see in future sessions. I read through every single response and all the input that you offer us. It really does shape what we share here at PD Health at Home programming. So please know that your input is extremely valuable to us here at the Parkinson's Foundation. And thank you so much for joining us today. We're honored to have shared this time with you and hope you found the information and resources helpful on your journey. Please know that you are not alone. Our community is here to support you every step of the way. Your strength, your resilience, and dedication inspires us here at the Parkinson's Foundation, and we're grateful for the opportunity to be a part of your journey. If you have questions or are seeking additional support, don't hesitate to reach out. Together we can navigate this path and continue building a brighter future. Thank you again for being with us, and we look forward to connecting with you at future programs. Take care and be well.